Part 8. I Can See the Laws of Things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 71. The surrounding family representatives were sweating profusely and trembling in their hearts. The representative of the winner was trembling all over, and the fear in his eyes was infinitely magnified. Chen Daoming turned to look at the trembling winner's representative kneeling on the ground, and said calmly, "Representative of the winner, please answer my question." The winner's representative had hollow eyes and trembled. The following are unpardonable crimes. According to the law, his family should be excluded from the Supreme Council, all family assets should be confiscated, and he should be subject to the highest military trial. As soon as these words came out, the winner's representative collapsed to the ground. Chen Daoming asked deeply, "What's the result of the trial?" The family representative lowered his head tremblingly and said tremblingly, "Death penalty, or exile." Chen Daoming said deeply, "Then do you think I should exile you winners? Or should I sentence you to death?" As soon as these words came out, the expression of the entire audience changed, and no one dared to speak. The surrounding atmosphere instantly turned tense to freezing point. The winner's representative instantly collapsed, and cold sweat fell to the ground drop by drop along his forehead. He looked at Chen Daoming sitting there in horror, and the defense in his heart was instantly destroyed. He knew that the winner was finished. The midday news reported that this afternoon, winner, who is affiliated with one of the highest councils in the Kyushu region, has been removed from the parliamentary quota. All of winner's assets in Kyushu region have been frozen. 121 winner members, including the head of the winner family, have been suspended. Arrested, 5 people are at large, and the Supreme Council has issued a city-wide arrest order for them. This major earthquake that occurred in the Kyushu region was unexpected. As one of the members of the Supreme Council, winner has strong assets in the Kyushu region and was able to uproot the entire winner in just half a day. It can be seen from this Mr. Chen Daoming's courage and ability. Jiuzhou region officials have made a statement that the winner and the interest groups they represent have blatantly provoked the authority of the Supreme Council and carried out a series of surveillance, assassination, and other terrorist activities against the venerable Chen family. Their actions are punishable. The Jiuzhou region Supreme the Parliament attaches great importance to this and has disarmed the winner as soon as possible. Today evening, Mr. Chen Daoming held a press conference. Mr. Chen Daoming said that he advises all lawbreakers who want to challenge the existing order in the Jiuzhou territory to stop early. If any similar incidents are discovered again, as the supreme ruler of the 9 provinces region, the Chen family will immediately carry out the highest level attack on you. Lin An sat on the sofa and watched the news on TV. He didn't expect that Chen Daoming would handle the matter so quickly. From this, it can be imagined that Chen Daoming paid enough attention to him. However, Lin An knew that they were not the masterminds of winner's action against him. The real masterminds were probably still hiding in the dark. Chen Daoming must also know this. What he did to the winner this time was his attempt to scare the monkeys. But fortunately, at least in the next period of time, the Kyushu region will probably be more restrained. 2 days later, Ban Meng came here to say goodbye to him. As a raider of major cities in the Kyushu region, it was obviously impossible for her to stay in Jianghai City forever. However, after Jianghai City, the evaluation of Chongcheng has also reached the final stage. It is estimated that it will not take long for her to complete the evaluation. We'll meet again, Lin. Before leaving, Ban Meng, wearing a black dress and holding a black umbrella, stood on the road, turning her head to look at Lin An who came out to see him off. She is so beautiful, no matter where she goes, she is a sight to behold. In order to protect her safety, the Chen family sent at least several people at the Grand Master level to protect her secretly. Around the extended limousine, there were hundreds of bodyguards in black suits standing. This kind of appearance was particularly impressive even in the Kyushu domain. Lin An was still wearing a sweatshirt, leaning against the wall with her shoulders folded, and said with a slight smile, I've always been curious, why do you keep holding that black umbrella? Is it a special hobby? Banman gently closed her eyes, her face curved up, she shook her head and said softly. It used to be because I was afraid of the sun, but since you cured my disease, it's no longer necessary. She put away her black umbrella, walked to Lin En, raised her head and looked into Lin En's eyes, and said, I want to give you this umbrella. Lin En raised his eyebrows and said, what are you doing for me? Banman said firmly, I want to give it. Lin En looked into her firm eyes, took the black umbrella helplessly, hugged her shoulders and said, stop standing there stupidly, let's go, so many people are waiting for you. When Ban Meng heard Lin En's softened tone, bright lights flashed in her eyes, and she asked, are we friends now? Lin En said speechlessly, that's right. A smile appeared on Ban Meng's face, as if an eternal iceberg suddenly began to melt, and a moving brilliance appeared on his face. Except for the time when she decided to be killed by Lin, this was the first time she had smiled like this. Lin En's heart was also moved, but he didn't know that this smile actually made him feel vaguely familiar. It seemed that many years ago, someone had smiled at him like this. It's the same scene, the same time to say goodbye. It seems that even their looks are extremely similar. Lin En was a little dazed for a while. When he came to his senses, Ban Meng had already sat in the car. Lin En shook his head, tossed the black umbrella in his hand, and walked in the opposite direction with it on his shoulder. What he didn't see was that on the moving car, there was a pair of purple eyes staring at his back, disappearing to the end of the road. A few days later, Lin En went to Qin's house alone again. He didn't forget that the Qin family and Zhuzhu domain conspired to attack him that day. When Lin En appeared, the whole Qin family trembled. Because they already knew about the downfall of the winner, and also knew that Lin En's current identity was not something they could contend with. This time, Lin En had no mercy. All those who participated in this action against him were ruthlessly killed by him. Lin En has always had a creed in his heart, that is, if you kill someone, you must be prepared to be killed. Since the Qin family wants to kill him, they must be prepared to be completely destroyed. This matter did not take long. Now the four great masters of Jianghai city are in cahoots, because the power represented by Lin En is too powerful. For them, getting involved with Lin En is like hugging a huge tree. How could they offend Lin En for the Qin family, which has run out of luck? After destroying the Qin family, Lin En returned home. He looked at the black box in his hand and fell into deep thought. That day, when Chen Daoming said goodbye to him, he left this box to him and told him that he would open it after he left. The things inside would be of great use to him. Lin En almost forgot about this box because he wasted time dealing with that matter a few days ago. I don't know what will be inside. Lin En thought and slowly opened the box. After seeing the things in the box, Lin En's heart moved slightly. In the box, there was a piece of ancient dark green jade. The jade was carved into the shape of a Kylin. When I held it in my hand, it didn't feel cold at all, but rather extremely warm. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yi Tiao Xianyue. Chapter 72. There is also a letter at the bottom of that box. Lin opened the letter and saw that it read. Lin, the piece of jade you see is a secret treasure I got when I was young. I call it Kylin Jade Heart. You should know that when the spiritual energy recovery just started, ferocious beasts rioted around the world, and people wanted to. If you want to survive, you can only keep killing, and this secret treasure is a very dangerous thing that exists for the purpose of killing. Its most terrifying effect is that it can absorb the soul of every creature you kill and transform it into pure spiritual power that greatly nourishes itself. I think back then, it was precisely because of this piece of unicorn yuxin made me stand out among countless people quickly, and now I hand him over to you. But Lin, you have to understand that I am not doing this to encourage you to fight and kill, because there is something I want to tell you. Several Dharma gods and I have recently noticed the changes that are slowly taking place in this world. In many places outside our Kyushu territory, there have been many large-scale ferocious beast riots, and these riots are different from the past. On the contrary, it is very similar to when the spiritual energy was revived 100 years ago. Animals and plants have begun to mutate again, and the Earth's magnetic field has begun to become disordered from the poles. These signs indicate that it is very likely that the original spiritual energy recovery is only a preliminary stage for the Earth. Our planet, the changes are far from over, and none of us know what kind of changes will come in the end. This is why I told you before that our era is coming to an end, because once the changes begin, the world structure will definitely be reshuffled. By that time, no one will be able to survive alone. So you have to be prepared to improve your strength as much as possible before the change begins, because by that time, everything except strength will be illusory. After Lin En read the letter, he frowned deeply. It was impossible for Chen Daoming to lie to him. Obviously people above their level have indeed discovered some omens that ordinary people cannot. Chen Daoming was warning him. Indeed, we can't continue to be so comfortable now. No matter whether what he said is true or not, no matter whether the so-called change in the second stage of the world is really coming, we must be prepared in advance. Lin En picked up the piece of jade in his hand and carried it close to his body. After touching the skin, it is as if the jade stone has merged with itself, and there is almost no feeling of any strangeness. Can you absorb the souls of other creatures to nourish your own body? It's best to test first to see if it's really as powerful as he said. Lin En picked up the black umbrella, tidied it up briefly, turned around and left the bedroom. He planned to go for a walk outside the city. Brother, do you want to go out? King Ian, who was in the living room, opened her eyes wide when she saw Lin En's outfit. Lin En nodded and said, I plan to go for a walk outside the city and will be back soon. King Ian said worriedly, Brother, what are you doing outside the city? It has been reported on the news that there have been many incidents of ferocious beasts attacking tourists outside the city in the past few days. Now it is not safe outside the city. Lin En smiled and touched her head and said, King Ian, have you forgotten that my brother was specialized in killing ferocious beasts 2 years ago? What's more, with your brother's current strength, what ferocious beast can hurt your brother? King Ian pouted and said, then you come back early and don't stay up all night, otherwise I will be angry. Lin En said helplessly, I know. I know. King Ian glared at him, trotted into the bedroom, prepared a backpack for Lin, and put some food and necessities in it. Brother, you can take food with you on the road. There are no convenience stores outside the city, and it's not easy to use money. Brother, put on your travel shoes, no slippers. What should I do if my feet are hurt? Brother, you didn't bring any keys, mobile phone, power bank, gloves, and helmet. This is not allowed. A full half-hour later, Lin En looked at himself covered in bags and bags, armed to the teeth, and said speechlessly, I'm really just going out for a while, really. Can you not bring me a change of clothes? King Ian glared at him and said angrily, Brother. Lin En shook his head, put on his backpack, and said, Okay, I'll listen to you, why don't I take it with me? Then I'll go. Lin turned and walked towards the door. At this moment, a voiceless voice came from behind. Elder brother. Lin turned his head and said, What's wrong? King Ian quickly ran over, stood up on tiptoes, hugged his neck, and said, It has been 2 years. This is the first time that you have left me, brother. But even if it is only for 1 day, I am still scared, very scared, because when you came back 2 years ago. She choked up. Lin patted her soft shoulder and said softly, Don't worry, it's different now. King Ian looked into his eyes, clenched her fists, and said, Well, I know, brother, you are the strongest now. She already knew what happened that night. But, you have to be careful. After walking out of the community, Lin En took out his mobile phone from his arms and dialed Wang Keobei's phone number. Hey, Wang Keobei. I have a mission for you. After a few minutes, Lin hung up the phone and walked down the street. The task he gave Wang Keobei was to arrange manpower to protect his sister's safety. Since the last incident, Jianghai City had made him very uneasy. Lin En looked towards the surrounding buildings, and he could vaguely see a few hidden figures. They are from the Chen family, and they are several powerful bodyguards that Lin En asked from the Chen family. With them here, coupled with the protection of Wang Keobei and others, King Ian's safety can be guaranteed, at least for the time being. Along the road, Lin walked towards the outside of the city. And just as he was about to leave the city, several black cars parked next to him. Lin En stopped. He recognized this car. It was Wu Diandian's Zhang Heiran's special car. Lin, why didn't you inform me that you were leaving the city? Zhang Heiran opened the car door and walked out with a speechless expression, saying, if Palace Master Wang hadn't informed me, I might still be kept in the dark. Lin En said helplessly, isn't it just a trip out of the city? Why bother with so much trouble? Zhang Heiran blew his beard and glared, what are you talking about? You are the top priority of our Jianghai city now. If anything happens to you, the entire Jianghai city will be destroyed. Lin En hugged his shoulders and said, so you're here to see me off? Zhang Heiran glared, smiled, and said, what's the gift? Are you going to walk out of the city? How can that be done? No, as soon as I heard that you were going out of the city, I immediately sent someone to get you a car. There is transportation tools are convenient after all. Lin turned his head and looked at the truck slowly following behind. A few minutes later, several top-level off-road vehicles were neatly placed in front of Lin. Zhang Heiran said with a smile, how about these vehicles? Not only are they powerful, they are also equipped with 10 cm thick armor. When ordinary ferocious beasts encounter this level of off-roading, they are all younger brothers. Lin En said speechlessly, do you think I need 10 centimeters of armor for protection? Zhang Heiran touched his head awkwardly. Indeed, with Lin En's methods, protection and so on were basically useless. Lin shook his head. Just when he was about to turn around, his eyes fell on a black motorcycle parked at the very back. Harley. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 73. A very famous brand 100 years ago, with full horsepower and very strong performance. Zhang Heiran said awkwardly, but Lin En, I brought it all, why don't you pick one? You can't let me take it back. Lin pointed to the Harley and said, that's the one. He turned around and stepped on the Harley. After starting, the Harley made a sound like a roaring beast. Lin En put on his helmet and said, excuse me, Palace Master Zhang, please come back. This one is enough. Zhang Heiran took a deep breath and said, you have to be careful. I don't know what happened outside the city recently. Vicious beasts often appear, and many highways are blocked. Lin made a gesture to him, and Harley immediately galloped away. After leaving Jianghai City, Lin En rushed south along the highway. Lin En was very familiar with the situation around Jianghai City. Jianghai City is located in the southernmost part of the Kyushu domain. 100 years ago, Jianghai City could actually be defined as an important border city. Because driving south along the highway for almost 300 kilometers, we left the jurisdiction of the Kyushu territory. Further south, there is a land that has been occupied by ferocious beasts and various abnormal creatures until now. 2 years ago, he broke both legs while resisting the invasion of ferocious beasts at the border. Lin En drove south for 2 hours, passing at least 5 checkpoints along the way. Each checkpoint was heavily guarded by Jianghai City. Soon, Lin En came to the last checkpoint set up by Jianghai City's army. There was a gas station inside the checkpoint. Lin En planned to fill up his tank here and continue heading south. After leaving this level, there is no security at all outside. If ordinary people were here, they would basically not survive the dark. While Lin was refueling, an officer led several soldiers in a Hummer to the gas station. The officer quickly opened the car door, trotted up to Lin En, and saluted Lin En with a standard military salute. "Excuse me, are you Lin En from Jianghai City?" Lin En took off his helmet in confusion and said, "It's me, what's wrong?" The officer immediately stood at attention in front of Lin En and saluted. "Reporting to Commander Lin En, I am the commander of Jianghai City's 7th Garrison. An hour ago, I received an order from above, which stated that you might go outside the territory through our checkpoint. Commander Shi Yangbei ordered us to do a good job for you. Reception work." Lin En understood what he meant and immediately couldn't laugh or cry. Obviously, after Wan Koubei learned about his departure from the city, he had already taken care of everything along the way. Because if you are an ordinary person, the procedures to go out of the country during this special period are very cumbersome. Lin En shook his head and said, "You go and do your work. You don't need to worry about me. There is no need for any reception work. I'm just going to go outside for a walk." The officer had a worried look on his face. Although he didn't know Lin En, the status of someone who could be directly ordered by Jianghai City's Supreme Committee to do the reception work was definitely not that high. He looked at Lin En and said solemnly, "Sir Lin En, if you really want to go outside the territory, I can arrange a chemical defense company of about 100 people to protect you all the way. You may not know something. Recently the ferocious beast riots outside the territory are much worse than what is reported in the news. During this period, we have blocked all the main roads leading to Jianghai City from outside the territory. If the situation continues to develop, we may soon activate a level 1 war alert." Lin En saw the worried look on his face and couldn't help frowning. What's going on? Didn't the news say it was just a routine ferocious beast causing trouble? The officer solemnly said, "Report to Chief Lin En, we have blocked the news because we are afraid of causing panic among the people of Jianghai City, because this time it is not just the ferocious beasts rioting, but also..." He was silent for a moment and said, "Plague." Lin En raised his eyebrows and said, "Plague?" The officer nodded, turned to look south, with a solemn look on his face, and said, "Yes, our intelligence department shows that starting from 5 days ago, a terrible plague appeared in the southern forest and has caused a certain range of infections. 2 days ago, the medical organization in the Kyushu region intervened in the investigation, and a medical team has been dispatched to a small town outside the territory for further investigation and evidence collection." Lin's brows furrowed. He did not expect that a plague would break out outside the territory. And it was actually so close to their Jianghai City. Historically, every large-scale plague outbreak has caused huge casualties and economic losses. As far as he knew, the most recent plague outbreak occurred in a major city in the north 5 years ago. At that time, the disease was not diagnosed at the first time, resulting in the situation getting out of control. In that year, millions of people in an entire important city were infected, and the death toll exceeded 100,000 unprecedentedly. Lin En frowned and said, "Is the situation serious now?" The officer solemnly said, "This still requires further evidence collection, but we have already prepared for the worst and will ensure that the plague will never spread to Jianghai City." Lin frowned and said, "Can you determine the nature and transmission route of the plague?" The officer immediately turned around and took out a report from the Humvee and said seriously, "According to the information obtained by our intelligence department, this plague came from the Yu Kingdom in the south. Just a month ago, a major city at the border of Yu Kingdom and Arjozhu territory, was invaded by a regional level 4 beast. That level 4 beast was the source of infection for this plague. During this invasion, according to conservative estimates, at least 50,000 people died and 100,000 people were infected. A few days ago, the plague spread to the jurisdiction of Arjozhu territory with the fleeing crowd. According to the report sent back by the medical organization yesterday, this plague is a very rare parasitic infectious disease. The infected will develop skin lesions, vomiting, fever and other symptoms within a few hours to a few days. And this infectious disease can be spread through body fluids and contact. After reading the report, the officer stood at attention and said, "Further information needs to be investigated. It is expected that in the evening, Arjozhu Territory Medical Organization will send us a second phase report." Lin An frowned and thought for a moment, then turned his head and looked to the south. It seems that things are indeed more serious than he imagined. And it was so close to their Jianghai city. For the virus, it was so close that it was even within reach. Once Jianghai city was infected. Lin An raised his head, his eyes deep, and said, "I know, tell me the coordinates of the town where your medical organization is located outside the region, and I will go there." The officer's face changed slightly, and he said, "Sir, the situation there now." Lin An said solemnly, "You don't have to worry about this, you just need to do a good job of prevention and control." The officer took a deep breath, saluted to Lin An, and said, "Yes, sir." After some supplies, the gate of the checkpoint slowly opened. Lin An looked at the south, put on his helmet, stepped on the accelerator, and the Harley under his crotch instantly went south. If Jianghai city was also infected, what would happen to his sister? Escape? That's not his style. Lin An looked at the map in his hand, looked at the direction again, and said solemnly, "Sanjiang town, about 100 kilometers, it's so close. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 74. Looking at Lin An's retreating back, the officer shook his head, a trace of worry flashing in his eyes. The higher UPS actually already knew about the epidemic in the south, but the order just now only asked them to do a good job of receiving Lin An. But they didn't let them stop Lin An from going south. He shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. "Close the door." After giving the order, he walked towards the military camp, but at this moment, a soldier drove a Humvee in his direction with a solemn look on his face. "Sir, the latest news is coming from the Southern Medical Organization." The officer took the telegram, glanced at him, and said, "How is the situation?" The soldier looked pale and said, "Sir, you'd better see for yourself." The officer quickly opened the file. After seeing the report in the file, his expression suddenly changed. How could? After driving about 50 kilometers, the highway came to an end. Going forward is a bumpy dirt road. Lin stopped, took off his helmet, took a sip of water, and wiped the sweat from his head. He took a look at the map and realized that as long as he continued driving along this dirt road, he would reach Sanjiang town, which was only about 50 kilometers away. Lin is no stranger to this town. He had done repairs there a few years ago when he was still a senior mage. It was a small town with simple folk customs, and he even knew several local comrades in the town. "Just keep going," he shook his head. "Originally, I just wanted to find a ferocious beast to test the effect of the Kylan Jade Heart, but now it seems that I may not be able to go back today." And just when he was about to continue his journey, suddenly he saw smoke and dust billowing in the distance. An off-road vehicle was driving in his direction, and it was driving very unevenly and seemed to be very eager. Lin frowned. At this moment, his pupils suddenly shrank. Because he heard some kind of extremely sharp scream coming from behind the off-road vehicle. Squeak. It was like the piercing scream of some kind of insect. The next moment, Lin saw that in the billowing smoke, countless insects like locusts were buzzing and chasing the off-road vehicle. There were so many of them that at a glance, they formed a smoke screen with a diameter of dozens of meters. Bugs, Lin frowned suddenly. The next moment, he saw those flying insects falling on the back compartment of the off-road vehicle like corrosive smoke, and the hard armor was corroded into spots in an instant. On top of the off-road vehicle, I saw a young man wearing a white coat and glasses, covered in blood, holding the steering wheel in horror, screaming in the direction of Lin. In an instant, the off-road vehicle flew several meters into the air, grazing Lin's body and leaping towards the back. While in mid-air, Lin and the young man's eyes briefly met, and Lin could clearly see the panic in the young man's eyes. Lin said expressionlessly, "It seems that the matter is more serious than I thought." Lin looked forward and waved to the off-road vehicle expressionlessly. In an instant, 2 wheels of law were constructed in his hands. Gathering of strong winds plus levitation. When the 2 wheels of law were formed, the off-road vehicle that was about to hit a big tree not far away was instantly suspended in the air by a strong wind. Due to the huge inertia, the young man rushed out of the front windshield in an instant and landed heavily on the ground. He looked at the off-road vehicle suspended in the air in amazement, and then turned to look at the man riding on the Harley. The man with the helmet. "Be careful! Don't touch those bugs!" he yelled. Because the moment Lin took control of the off-road vehicle, the insect swarm was already swarming over. Like a storm, the dense black insect swarm instantly changed its attack targets and surged towards Lin. Lin snorted coldly, and in his eyes, a red wheel of law was instantly constructed. Gathering of strong winds plus burning. At that moment, the sweeping wind instantly burst into flames. The dense swarm of insects was swept away by the high-temperature gas at that moment, making a crackling sound. Countless burning bugs fell from the sky, emitting bursts of foul-smelling gas. Seeing this scene, the man collapsed on the ground with a look of extreme astonishment on his face. The insect swarm chasing him was completely wiped out in an instant. Lin stepped on the accelerator, turned around and stopped in front of him, lowered his head, looked at the young man through the black helmet, and said, "Are you okay?" The young man looked at Lin in shock and was about to speak, but at this moment, his pupils suddenly dilated. He looked behind Lin and shouted, "Careful!" This time, it was not only those tiny insect swarms that were following him, but also a huge mutated insect with extremely powerful single combat power. In an instant, a huge gap opened in the ground behind Lin, and a huge insect with barbs all over its body jumped out from the ground and rushed toward Lin. Its mouth made a terrifying sound like cutting a baby. Squeak. When he reminded him, the insect had already burst out of the ground and was less than 10 centimeters away from Lin almost in an instant. But just when he thought Lin was about to be cut and torn apart by the insect, his pupils suddenly dilated. The man on the Harley didn't even move. But the insect that was about to tear his body apart was instantly knocked away horizontally as if it had been hit by a heavy punch. And just when the insect was about to land on the ground, thorns suddenly grew on the ground. Poof! Poof! The insect was instantly pierced through its body and let out a long and shrill cry. The young man's eyes widened in shock. He felt that what had just smashed the insect out was the extremely condensed wind. This man was a wind master. But what pierced the insect just now was a sudden growth of ground thorns. Could it be said that he was another ground magician? And the flames that burned just now? What is this man? Lin looked at him calmly and said, "I'm asking you something, aren't you going to answer me? Who are you and where do you come from?" The man recovered from the huge shock. He quickly got up, swallowed subconsciously, looked at Lin with some fear, and said, thank you for saving me. I am one of the members of the medical team sent by the Kyushu region to the south to conduct a careful investigation of the plague. My name is Lin Zheng. I am going to Jianghai City to make a daily report. Lin saw his eyes flicker and his gaze shifted to the side. Lin An said calmly, "What's going on with those bugs?" The man glanced at the burning insects with lingering fear, trembled, and said, "They were ferocious beasts I encountered in the forest. They were chasing me. If it weren't for you, I might have died here today." Lin An looked at him expressionlessly and said, "Are you infected? So you escaped from the south and planned to bring the plague to Jianghai City. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 75. As soon as these words came out, the young man's face changed drastically. He fell to the ground and stepped back, saying in horror, I didn't. Don't talk nonsense. I didn't get the plague. I didn't." Lin An looked down at him and said lightly, "I saved your life, but you lied to me. I have never had any good feelings towards such people. From now on, you'd better answer every question I ask truthfully, otherwise, the consequences will be serious." The young man named Lin Zheng looked at Lin An wearing a helmet in horror. He nodded subconsciously with sweat dripping from his head. Lin An said lightly, "Are you infected?" Lin Zheng looked at his arm tremblingly, and saw a shallow wound on his arm, but at this moment, the wound had turned purple and emitted a foul odor. He held his head tremblingly and said, I was just scratched by those bugs, I. Lin An said lightly, "Next question, what are those bugs?" Lin Zheng held his head tremblingly and said, They are people from Sanjiang town, no. They are monsters hatched from their bodies, the plague has spread in Sanjiang town, our medical team has no way, many people have been infected, those bugs will be hatched, and then infect more people." Lin An raised his eyebrows. Monsters hatched from the human body? Thinking of what the officer said before, this is a parasitic infectious disease. But now it seems that the situation is obviously much worse than he expected. Lin An narrowed his eyes, looked at the young man, and said, "Is there anyone alive in the town? Where are the other members of your medical team?" Lin Zheng trembled and said, I don't know. At noon, the plague suddenly got out of control. Miss Bai Qi urgently controlled the infected people, but we failed. The swarm of insects kept hatching and had already formed a scale. Not long ago, they broke through our defense line and everything was in chaos. He was sweating and trembling as he sat on the ground, saying, I stole a car and escaped. I don't want to die. I'm still young. I have parents in Jianghai City and my fiancé. I'm getting married soon. I don't want to die." Lin An said lightly, "Then do you know that if you take these bugs to Jianghai City, not only you, but also your parents, fiancé, and the entire Jianghai City will be implicated because of you?" Lin Zheng panted and said, I don't know, I just want to go home." Lin An turned his head and looked to the south, expressionless and said, "Let's go, take me to Sanjiang town. If the situation is really as you said, it has gone out of control, for the safety of Jianghai City, then I need to clean up that town." Lin Zheng trembled and said, You want me to go back?" "No. This is absolutely not possible. It has become a hell on earth now. Going back will only lead to death." Lin An waved his hand impatiently. In an instant, a will of life was constructed in his hand. Lin Zheng was stunned, and in an instant, he was extremely shocked to see that his injuries were healing rapidly. Even the already smelly infection on his arm began to heal rapidly. He looked at his body tremblingly and said, This. Lin An said expressionlessly, "Do I need to ask you?" Lin Zheng stood up quickly and said in shock, You can cure the plague in my body." Lin An said lightly, "It just replenished your vitality so that you won't die for a while. The plague is still in your body, but it has been contained for the time being." Lin Zheng looked at him in disbelief, and the shock in his heart surged through his body like a tide. This method is like a miracle. He no longer feels any discomfort in his body. If he went to Sanjiang town, maybe he could really. He immediately got up and gritted his teeth and said, I'll take you there. Lin An glanced at him and turned to walk towards the body of the insect. He narrowed his eyes slightly. This should also be considered a fierce beast. If it is really like what Chen Daoming said, the Kailan Jade Heart should also be able to absorb the soul of this guy, if it has a soul. Lin An's hand slightly stretched out towards the dead insect. And in the next moment, he saw clearly that a ray of translucent light blue light slowly seeped into his hand. At the same time, the Kailan Jade Heart on his chest flickered slightly. Suddenly, Lin An felt his spirit was lifted and his mental power was replenished. It really worked. And the mental power provided for him was very pure, which was many times higher than that of simple cultivation. Lin An clenched his fists, and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. It really only needs to kill the creature to absorb the opponent's mental power and then replenish himself. It seems that what Chen Daoming said is right. Lin An turned his head and looked to the south, and a trace of sharpness flashed in his eyes. It seems that this time he has a chance to improve himself. Let's go. Location, Sanjiang town. Quick. Quick. Everyone evacuate to the second line of defense immediately. A warrior holding a steel sword in his hand shouted at the panicked crowd. The entire Sanjiang town has fallen into chaos. If you stand in the sky and look down at this moment, you can clearly see that the dense swarm of insects has flooded half of the town like a flood. We must build a new line of defense at the exit of the town. No matter what, we must control the insect swarm within Sanjiang town. If they break through our defense and rush towards Jianghai city, we will not be able to shoulder this responsibility even if we die. An officer from Sanjiang town roared into the phone. He opened the door suddenly and strode out. I saw that swarms of insects had begun to gather in the sky, and the dense insects formed a dark storm, covering almost half of the sky. On the street not far away, cars blocked the middle of the road, forming an oval-shaped defense line. A large number of soldiers stood on the side of the car, wearing chemical protective masks and holding flamethrowers in their hands, roaring and spraying flames into the sky. One after another, terrified residents ran screaming from the streets in their direction. Report to the commander, a scarred soldier trembled. What about those civilians? We can't confirm whether they have been infected. Once there is an infected person among them, it will be useless even if we guard this place. The officer gritted his teeth, his eyes were scarlet, and said, "Open the defenses and let them in." The soldier trembled and said, "Sir." The officer roared and grabbed his collar, saying, "Didn't you hear my order? Let them in. I will bear all the consequences. Before any changes occur, they are still our people. You heard me clearly? No. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 76. The soldier roared, "Listen clearly." The officer suddenly turned his head, quickly came to a large tent, and walked in. "Miss Bai Chi. How is the situation?" In the large tent, many medical personnel wearing chemical protective suits were busy. Among them, the only one who was not wearing a mask was a woman who looked about 22 or 23 years old. She was wearing a white chemical protective suit, her long hair was tightly wrapped in a helmet, and her black eyes were extremely solemn. Gloss. At this moment, she was performing medical operations next to a patient who was strapped tightly to the table. The skin of the patient's whole body had been turned over, and he looked extremely frightening. Bai Chi said solemnly, the circulation of parasites in the host's body has accelerated by 21 times compared to yesterday. The incubation period of more than 10 days has now been advanced to several hours. She suddenly turned her head to look at the officer and said solemnly, "This situation is not without precedent. According to the intelligence I have obtained from abroad, there is only one explanation for this situation." The officer frowned and said, "What?" Bai Qi said solemnly, "A powerful radiation source, a virus mother that can control all the parasites parasitic in the human body, has appeared near our Sanjiang town. This is also the direct reason why the situation suddenly got out of control an hour ago." The officer's face suddenly turned pale, and he gritted his teeth and said, "I need a reasonable explanation." Bai Qi narrowed her eyes and said, "A few months ago, this kind of parasitic epidemic occurred for the first time in the southern Yu Kingdom. The Yu Kingdom blocked the specific information. They did not disclose what caused the death of the building with dozens of people. A city with a population of 10,000 will turn into a dead city in just a few hours. The rapid fall of that important city was precisely because after causing a large-scale infection, the level 4 ferocious beast carrying the pathogen approached that important city, thus accelerating the pathogenesis of the infected people. In a short period of time, a large number of infected people were transformed into a swarm of insects, quickly forming an unprecedented insect wave." The officer trembled. "Are you saying that the pathogen has already arrived outside our Sanjiang town?" Bai Qi solemnly clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. "I don't know. The Yu Kingdom has blocked most of the news, but since the pathogen has not invaded south, the only explanation is..." She looked at the southern sky in fear and said, "It's across the border, it's heading north." And at this moment, suddenly, there was a huge explosion sound outside. Bai Qi and the officer's expressions changed, and they quickly left the tent and walked outside. When they saw the scene outside, the blood on their faces disappeared instantly, and their eyes showed great fear. In the sky, surrounded by countless dense swarms of black insects, giant black insects as tall as a person appeared one after another on the tall buildings. Squeak! Their pitch-black mouthparts emitted a scalp-numbing cry. The officer trembled and said, "That is, what is that?" Bai Qi gritted her teeth and said, "High-level mutants hatched by infected warriors and mages. Because of the powerful power in their bodies, warriors and mages have become a hotbed that can quickly complete their evolution. The strength of these mutants, but it's far from being comparable to those low-level bugs." The officer's face instantly turned pale and he said, "You mean, even warriors and mages can be infected?" Bai Qi bit her lip, a trace of pain flashed in her eyes, and said, "That's right. The biggest case that has ever occurred is that a Grand Master level warrior from South Vietnam became an infected person. Because there was no special medicine, his transformation occurred in just 3 days, and thus, a terrifying mutant capable of level 4 ferocious beasts was derived." The officer trembled. This is simply a disaster. In the current positioning of the world, level 4 ferocious beasts are defined as terrifying existences that can easily destroy a heavy city. If this plague spreads among warriors or mages, it may cause an earthquake beyond imagination. And at the next moment, those dark mutants seemed to have received some kind of instructions and launched an offensive in their direction at the same time. 1, 2, 3. Bai Qi trembled and said, "There are 21 mutants in total, and the infected people who derived them should at least be in the extraordinary realm. How could this be? There is absolutely no way that there are so many extraordinary people in Sanjiang town to become their breeding ground. Is it really the terrible source of the disease?" The officer roared, "Quick! Retreat immediately! Blow up the car and use the flames to deal with them." The soldiers retreated quickly, then sprayed flames toward the defense line of cars. In an instant, as the group of mutants rushed towards them, the cars exploded one after another. Bai Qi took a step back tremblingly and said, "It's useless. Ordinary means can't deal with them at all. We don't even have a transcendent one here, we can't defend them. And almost at the moment she just finished speaking, a mutant suddenly jumped out of the flames and screamed like a banshee at the horrified crowd. Everyone's faces were instantly filled with fear. Their hearts suddenly dropped and they fell into the abyss of death. The next moment, the mutants rushed into the crowd and started killing. The officer roared, "Flameman!" The high-temperature flames instantly enveloped the mutants, but it had no effect. In an instant, the mutants broke through the flames and grabbed the flamemen and started to eat them. The shrill screams resounded through the sky. Bai Chi took a step back, with a trace of fear in her eyes. But she suddenly bit her lip, raised her head and looked at the mutants fiercely, saying, "You destroyed my city, killed my father, and now you want to get involved in my hometown. I absolutely won't allow it." She suddenly stretched out her hand and grabbed the collar of her chest. In an instant, no one saw that a bloody life wheel slowly emerged on the skin on her chest. A terrible sense of danger with an extremely dangerous aura, like a bomb about to explode. With the emergence of the red life wheel. Plop! Plop! The bloody life wheel was pulsating continuously. In an instant, all the mutants turned their heads and looked in the direction of Bai Chi, with crazy bloodthirsty killing intent in their eyes. They felt the danger. The next moment, all the mutants rushed towards the girl, they jumped high, and their sharp breath flashed with cold light. In Bai Chi's pupils, the bodies of those mutants quickly enlarged. "Miss Bai Chi," the officer roared. But at that critical moment, suddenly, they heard the huge roar of the engine from behind. In the next moment, a black Harley jumped up, and the rotating wheels hit the mutants flying in the air heavily. Bai Chi clutched the front of her clothes tightly. The black Harley passed through her stunned eyes, and when it hit the mutants, the sparks covered her whole body. At the same time, at that moment, she saw the man riding on the Harley. Her eyes trembled suddenly, and her brain was blank in an instant. The four mutants were directly thrown more than 10 meters away by the impact of the Harley. The Harley fell to the ground and drifted around a corner and stopped. The man sitting on the Harley took off his helmet, turned his head and looked at them, and a purple light flashed in his eyes. "You guys are so lame. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yi Tiao Xianyue. Chapter 77. Everyone present looked at the man who suddenly appeared in astonishment, their minds going blank. Bai Chi slumped on the ground, clutching the skirt of her clothes and looking at Lin An tremblingly. If this man hadn't appeared just now, she believed that she would have detonated the life wheel in her body at the last moment, but that was definitely not something she wanted to see. Everyone's eyes fell on the man, as if a huge aura enveloped the entire Sanjiang town. Those mutants quickly got up from the ground, and the collision just now did not cause any substantial damage to them. But people were immediately shocked to see that those mutants seemed to have encountered an extremely terrifying opponent. Their bodies tensed up, staring at the man sitting on Harley, and then stepped back step by step. They are scared. This idea suddenly appeared in Bai Chi's mind. She turned her head and looked at the man, her eyes filled with shock. Who is he? The strength of these mutants is at least extraordinary, and they are murderous, but at this moment, they are actually afraid. The surrounding soldiers also noticed this scene, and they quickly gathered together and all evacuated behind the man. "Miss Bai Chi, are you okay?" The officer immediately helped Bai Chi up. Bai Chi shook her head, looked at Lin An's back, and said, "Who is he?" The officer shook his head solemnly, not that he knew Lin An. He said solemnly, "I don't know, but it seems that he is a very powerful man. Could it be that he is the reinforcement sent by Jianghai City to support us?" At this moment, the roar of the engine was heard again from behind. A few seconds later, a badly damaged off-road vehicle parked on the side of the road. The young man named Lin Zheng quickly got out of the car and ran to Bai Chi's side, gasping, "Sir Bai Chi, are you okay?" Bai Chi gritted her teeth, looked at him carefully, and said solemnly, "You became a deserter." Lin Zheng turned his head, his eyes flickering. He took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry, Chief Baichi. After the incident, I voluntarily accepted the trial of the organization. But now we are saved." Baichi said solemnly, "What do you mean?" Lin Zheng turned to look at Lin En, who was sitting on Harley in front of him, and said firmly, "He is a mage I met on the road. You can never imagine his power. I can tell you clearly, Commander Baichi, as long as he is here, the spread of the plague will stop here." Baichi and the officer turned their heads in shock and said, "Who is he?" Lin Zheng shook his head and said, "I don't know, he didn't tell me his name, but he easily eliminated the insect swarm that was chasing me, and..." He suddenly stretched out his arm, rolled up his sleeves, and gritted his teeth and said, "He contained my infection, Chief Baichi, can you believe it? He just waved his hand and all my injuries recovered, and I don't feel any discomfort caused by the infection now." As soon as these words came out, Baichi and the people around her instantly showed extremely shocked expressions. Baichi murmured, "You mean, he can cure this new type of plague? If this is really the case. If this is really the case." One after another, the people injured by the swarm raised their heads tremblingly, as if they finally saw a glimmer of light in the infinite darkness. Wisps of hope quickly burned in their eyes like sparks of fire. Because this plague outbreak is so fast, people simply cannot develop a suitable vaccine in such a short period of time. If we follow historical practice, this plague will have to kill at least several hundred people before it can be contained. And now. Lin took off his helmet, walked slowly towards the mutants, and said expressionlessly, "Everyone, stay back. If you are accidentally injured by me, I will not be responsible for paying the medical expenses." The officer immediately stood up and shouted at everyone, saying, "Quick! Everyone retreats 200 meters back." One after another, the exhausted residents supported each other and retreated quickly. And for some reason, they suddenly found that the pain caused by the illness seemed to be contained all of a sudden. Looking in the direction of Lin En, there was a trace of excitement in their eyes. "This person looks really strong. Very strong. It seems there is no need to worry at all. Who is he? Is he a master? Is he the Grand Master of the Kyushu domain?" So excited. When they retreated, the 21 mutants had also gathered together. Although they were bugs, they obviously had the ability to think and judge. When they gathered together, their fear seemed to be contained. They obviously thought that their 21 mutants should be enough to fight against this man. And it wasn't just them, the swarms of insects in the sky like a black curtain also gathered above their heads, making a harsh and annoying buzzing sound. At a glance, it was so dense that it was like dark clouds covering the sky and the sun. The next moment, the 21 mutants roared at each other, and their sharp forelimbs suddenly opened and cut through the air in an instant. 21 mutants attacked Lin almost at the same time. Their speed is really too fast. So fast that they even left after images behind them. These mutants at least have the speed and strength of extraordinary warriors, and because of the terrifying physical fitness and exoskeleton of the insect swarm, their defensive capabilities have been qualitatively improved. If warriors of the same level as them confront them head-on, they may only be crushed. Lin snorted coldly. Suddenly he stretched out his hand towards the exploding car in the distance, the purple light in his eyes flashed, and he opened the Eye of Law. In an instant, the 3 wheels of law were completed in his eyes. Gravity plus acceleration plus high temperature. Under the action of the 3 wheels of law, the temperature emitted by the burning car due to the explosion increased hundreds to thousands of times in an instant. You can even vaguely see that the steel on the car has melted into molten iron. The next moment, those cars levitated and flew towards the mutants at an unimaginable speed. Boom! 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 A terrible explosion sounded, and the speed of those mutants was already fast enough, but they were horrified to find that the cars that were melted into molten iron were 10 times and 100 times faster than them. And the control is so precise that it's outrageous. At speeds exceeding the speed of sound, each car can accurately hit a mutant, with almost no mistakes. The screams of burned insects were heard. Those mutants kept struggling in the molten iron and high temperatures, wailing miserably. Crush. Everyone who saw the scene was stunned. They had imagined a very fierce battle scene, and imagined the scene when this man fought with those swarms of insects, but their scene was completely beyond their expectations. The officer trembled and said, "To be crushed just like that? Those are 21 extraordinary mutants with outstanding combat capabilities. Could it be that he is really a grandmaster?" Bai Chi said deeply, "No. An ordinary grandmaster will never survive under the siege of 21 extraordinary beings. He is most likely a great grandmaster, or even a legendary grandmaster." As soon as this statement came out, the whole audience was shocked. They have a great master coming to Sanjiang town. Heavens above! What a ghost to be afraid of! All the onlookers were in an instant climax. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 78. Everyone was excited. Even some disabled people stood up with red faces and shouted excitedly in the direction of Lin En. It's actually a grandmaster. God, a grandmaster has come to our Sanjiang town. What's there to be afraid of? Big Brother is awesome. Kill them. Kill them. Let these damn bugs know that we humans are definitely not easy to mess with. Awesome. Awesome. This is human. Just now, they were still struggling in despair, but when hope came, and they found that this hope was so great, people would immediately forget the pain and fear they were enduring. What insect swarm? What plague? Go to hell. In front of our human race, you are all brothers. In an instant, the purple light in Lin An's eyes flashed, and the wheel of rule symbolizing acceleration was instantly engraved on his body. At the same time, he took off the black umbrella that Ban Meng gave him from behind, and the top of the black umbrella was immediately applied with the sharp wheel of rules. It's time to start harvesting. The souls of these extraordinary mutants are definitely a great tonic for the Kylan Jade Heart. Such a good thing, wouldn't it be a pity to waste it? In an instant, Lin An's body turned into a series of afterimages, and he held the black umbrella in his hand and instantly pierced the head of the mutant closest to him that was struggling in the flames. At the moment of piercing the mutant's head, the Kylan Jade Heart on his chest flashed. It was vaguely seen that one after another blue light was absorbed from the mutant into the Kylan Jade Heart in public. Lin An smiled slightly, and instantly felt that the consumed mental power was restored to full state. The excess mental power has begun to automatically nourish his soul and increase the upper limit of his mental power. Very good. The next moment, Lin An increased his speed to the extreme. His body shuttled through one mutant after another, and his movements were so dazzling that he couldn't even see clearly. 1. 5. 10. One mutant after another died under his black umbrella. The people around stared at the scene in amazement, and almost forgot to breathe. Wait, the officer murmured, isn't he a mage? How can a mage be so fast? Lin Zhen was speechless for a moment, and his eyes looking at Lin An were full of shock. He murmured. I don't know. I only saw him control the elements, but I haven't seen him fighting with people at close range. Just under everyone's incredible gaze. A few seconds later, Lin An appeared dozens of meters away. He carried the black umbrella on his shoulders and strode towards the swarm of insects gathered in the air in the distance. He didn't even turn his head back. And the 21 mutants behind him were all frozen in place. Almost at the same time, their heads exploded at the same time, and their bodies fell heavily into the burning molten iron. Everyone was stunned. The next moment, everyone in the audience climaxed and roared excitedly. So ruthless. This seems to be a scene that can only be seen in Hollywood blockbusters. It makes my blood boil. I almost want to crush my two balls. I must become a mage in the future, no, a warrior, no. A warrior who can do magic. With a light jump, Lin An jumped onto a 6-story building. He stepped on the rooftop, carrying a black umbrella, looking at the flying insects in the sky, spitting out the tree roots in his mouth, raising his head, and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. What's the use of insects that can't provide me with souls? He casually stretched out a finger and gently raised it to the sky. At that moment, a terrible gust of wind suddenly blew in the sky, and the gust of wind instantly turned into a huge tornado, surrounding the swarm of insects in the center. Then his finger and thumb were pinched together. Snap! He snapped his fingers towards the sky and turned away. At the moment when he snapped his fingers, the storm surrounding the insect swarm suddenly burned with raging flames. The flames continued to spread along the strong wind, and in an instant, a huge fire tornado formed above Sanjiang town. Countless insects were burned to ashes in the firestorm. The crackling sound resounded throughout the sky. Lin An walked towards Bai Qi and the others with a black umbrella, with a blazing tornado behind him. This scene shocked everyone present. And what surprised Lin An was that the insects killed this time could actually provide him with mental power. This was something he did not expect. Obviously, it was because the quantitative change produced a qualitative change. A large number of dead insects gathered together, causing the Kylan Jade Heart to react. It can be vaguely seen. Countless blue lights gathered into a rolling long stream, rushing towards Lin An's body from the direction of the fire tornado. Lin An instantly felt that the mental power brought by killing these insects actually exceeded that of the 21 extraordinary mutants. And this rolling mental power gathered together, and instantly made his mental power limit break through the extraordinary and reach the level of a master. What does this mean? This means that the power of the will of law he constructed now will be further improved. There will be more wheels of law that can be constructed. If he fights the previous Grand Master now, there is no need to go through so much trouble. It is indeed worthy of the Kylan Jade Heart, Lin An said in a low voice. So amazing. Chen Daoming was able to obtain such a secret treasure at the beginning, which obviously had great luck. Even because of this secret treasure, Chen Daoming can be called the protagonist of that era. Because it is simply too amazing. As long as you keep killing, you can take the opponent's soul for yourself, which is many times more efficient than just staying at home and practicing hard. Sure enough, Lin An raised his head and smiled. People who practice hard will never be as good as those who walk around outside. Now he has a deep understanding of this. The tornado in the sky slowly extinguished, and countless insects turned into black ashes and fell densely all over Sanjiang town. People woke up from the shock just now, and their eyes looking at Lin An were instantly filled with awe. Thank you. Bai Qi and the officer immediately walked towards Lin An and paid the highest respect to Lin An. You saved all of us, the officer saluted Lin An and said firmly. Yu Haoming, the commander of the 11th Army of Jianghai City, thanks you. He bowed straight to Lin An. The residents and officers who were still alive around him all tried to stand up and bowed to Lin An. Bai Qi also bowed deeply to Lin An and said. Thank you for your help. If it weren't for you, Sanjiang town would not be saved today. Lin An leaned on Harley, took a sip of mineral water, and said. Don't get me wrong, I'm not here to save you, I just don't want the plague to spread to Jianghai City, and there are my family in Jianghai City. Bai Qi raised his head in astonishment and said, Are you the master of Jianghai City? Master, Lin An raised the corner of his mouth and said, I guess so. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 79. Everyone around them covered their mouths and looked at Lin En. No, the strength he showed just now was definitely not just that of a grandmaster. But when did such a powerful person appear in Jianghai City? Bai Qi took a deep breath, stretched out her hand to Lin En, and said politely, "My name is Bai Qi, and I am a special investigator of the International Medical Organization stationed in the Kyushu region. It turns out we are international friends." Lin En smiled faintly and said, "My name is Lin En." Lin En, Bai Qi thought about it. She felt that she had heard this name somewhere. It seemed that this name was included in a document sent by the officials of the Kyushu territory. But she couldn't remember it for a while. Bai Qi came back to her senses, smiled apologetically, lowered her head and said, "I can't be considered an international friend. Although I work abroad all year round, my ancestral home is in Kyushu. The main reason why I came back this time is because of the plague." Her brows became serious. The officer named Yu Haoming breathed rapidly and said, "Grandmaster Lin En, I heard that you have a way to treat infected people? Is this true?" He is a soldier. In any case, his first priority is the people of Sanjiang Town. If all the people in Sanjiang Town were infected and the plague spread, he, as a soldier, would be blamed. Bai Qi also turned her head and looked at Lin En, with a hint of hope in her eyes. If he really could. That. Lin En sat on Harley and said, "Lin Zheng, come here." The young man named Lin Zheng was shocked. He lowered his head and walked nervously in front of Lin En. He is a deserter. A deserter who almost brought the plague and the swarm of insects to Jianghai City. He was now conscious, and he shuddered at the thought of the disaster he might have caused. "I betrayed the trust placed in me by the organization." He lowered his head and knelt down, pressing his forehead firmly against the ground, biting his lips and said, "If I bring the plague to Jianghai City and let it spread in the Kyushu region, I will die 10,000 times without regret." Lin En looked down at him and said calmly, "That's right, if that's really the case, you can't atone for your sins even if you die 10,000 times." Lin Zheng bit his lip, and tears fell on the ground. Lin had no sympathy for him. Maybe he did something like running away because of fear. But this is not a reason why he can excuse himself. Lin En had served in the mage army before. He had received the most rigorous training, and he had fought and escaped on the battlefield time and time again. People like deserters were the people he despised and despised the most. Lin Zheng closed his eyes, bit his lip and said, "Please, please kill me." Lin En looked down at him and said expressionlessly, "If you were my soldier, I would kill you mercilessly. After this matter is over, go to the military court and accept the trial." Lin Zheng burst into tears instantly. He kowtowed several times to everyone present, wiped his tears and said, "Yes. Lin is obeying orders." He was grateful to Lin. Because he not only saved his life, but also his soul. If he really went to Jianghai City, then just as he said, he would never be able to atone for his sins in his life, and he would definitely go to hell after his death. Lin En opened the Eye of Law and looked at Lin Zheng's body. Under the influence of the Eye of Law, Lin Zheng completely changed his appearance, and Lin En could clearly see the will of law that maintained his life. What he had previously imposed on Lin Zheng was a will of life. The function of the will of life is to restore his injuries and vitality, but whether it can cure the plague in his body, Lin is not sure. And at the next moment, Lin En's eyes narrowed. It seems a bit tricky. Because he saw that the infection in Lin Zheng's body showed signs of further expansion. Although due to the strong vitality support, his body has not yet shown any pathological reactions. But inside, the plague had begun to slowly eat away at his newly restored vitality. Seeing Lin En looking at Lin Zheng's body motionless, everyone around him held their breath. Bai Qi's eyes were even more brilliant. She was very smart. When she saw what Lin En did, She immediately understood that Lin An might have some special ability to check a person's physical condition. He is most likely observing the plague situation in Lin Zheng's body now. Miss Bai Qi. The officer named Yu Haoming hesitated to speak. Bai Qi looked at Lin An deeply and said, "Don't disturb him. Grandmaster Lin An should have some way of seeing through a person's body." Yu Haomin took a breath of air, with a look of astonishment on his face. In his eyes, the man named Lin An was once again shrouded in mystery. Time passed by minute by minute. Lin An's face slowly became serious. This plague is a foreign thing, and it is a plague of parasitic nature. These parasites use vitality as food. Simply restoring vitality can only extend the life of the infected person, and there is no way to completely eliminate this parasite. It is even very likely that these parasites will be further nourished because of the restored vitality. Lin An touched his chin and thought. If you use the will of rules of death to kill those parasites. But he immediately rejected his idea. The will of death is an extremely high-level will of rules. Let's not talk about whether it can be constructed. Even if it is constructed, how can it kill those parasites without affecting the infected people? You know, the number of parasites is replicating all the time. Lin Zhen now has at least 10,000 parasites in his body. Bai Qi said cautiously, "Grandmaster Lin, do you see anything?" Lin An frowned and did not answer her question. He looked at Lin Zheng, who was standing there in embarrassment and did not dare to move, and said, "Do you dare to accept my experiment? You are now the only infected person whose disease has been temporarily suppressed by me." Lin Zheng was startled, then raised his head instantly, saluted Lin An, and said firmly, "Dare. I dare to do anything. If this can serve the public, I will not hesitate to die." Lin An nodded, turned to look at Bai Qi, and said deeply, "I have a way to temporarily contain the plague so that infected people will not die immediately, but if we want to eradicate it, further experiments are needed." Bai Qi was shocked instantly. Can the plague be temporarily contained? This is great news for them. Because this plague is too severe, especially now, in an environment where the disease is likely to be accelerated due to the influence of the mother body. If the disease can be contained, the impact will be unimaginable. Bai Qi immediately breathed quickly and said, "If you can, Grandmaster Lin An, please help the people here." Lin An raised his head and said, "How many infected people are there now?" Bai Qi immediately said, "There are 821 confirmed cases in total, but because of this insect swarm attack, this number will at least double." Lin An thought, "There are so many, let everyone gather in the square, no one can be left behind." Bai Qi nodded immediately, turned to the officer and said, "Sir Yu, please make arrangements." Yu Haoming immediately saluted and said loudly, "Yes. I promise to complete the mission. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yi Tiao Xian Yue. Chapter 80. Half an hour later. At least 5,000 survivors gathered in the square. And at least a quarter of them were infected. Everyone raised their heads and looked at Lin An standing on the platform with anxiety and hope. The infected people were already desperate, and at this moment, someone suddenly gave them hope. This feeling was like dragging them back from hell. If Lin An could really save them, then there is no doubt that these people will become Lin An's most staunch supporters in the future. And Lin An didn't save them out of kindness. Because the people here spread the plague, and Jianghai City was the first to bear the brunt. Jianghai City is his home, where his sister is. He will never allow Jianghai City to be occupied by the plague. If he has to, he can even kill all the infected people here without mercy. If it really comes to that, he will do it. Because when an avalanche occurs, no snowflake is innocent. Undoubtedly, compared with Ban Meng, he is an absolutely rational person who controls his emotions. Chen Daoming was afraid of him at that moment because of this. Because if he really becomes a god, he will be an absolutely rational god. Lin En looked at everyone present and took a deep breath. He is going to do something now, something he has never done before, but if the prediction is correct, this thing will definitely restore the vitality of everyone present to the highest point at once. The next moment, he suddenly raised his head and looked at the sky. Dark clouds are gathering. He stared at the sky and said word by word. In an instant, everyone present showed a shocked expression. I saw that the sky was still clear just now, but at the moment he said that sentence, dark clouds began to gather slowly, and in an instant, the sky dimmed and blocked the setting sun. Crack! A flash of lightning streaked across the sky. The dark clouds in the sky were rolling, and the wind was surging. Oh my God! The people in the square trembled as they watched the clouds in the sky change color, and many old people knelt down subconsciously. Their eyes changed when they looked at Lin En. If they were still hopeful before, now they were in awe. An old man trembled and said, Are you a god?" The spiritual energy revived. The world changed drastically. In the eyes of ordinary people, this is the punishment of heaven and earth for mortals. Because science cannot explain all this, the only thing that can explain it is theology, and people's awe and conjecture about nature. Is there a God in this world? Does the so-called God exist? At least in the hearts of many ordinary people of the older generation, gods really exist. And at this moment, the sky and the earth changed color. For those of the older generation, it was like a miracle, as if telling them that there really is a God in this world. And now this God is standing in front of them. Bai Qi also turned her head and looked at Lin En in shock. She really had never seen such a method. In a word, making the sky and the earth change color, is this method really something that humans can do? Suddenly, she remembered the extremely cruel words her father said when he was experimenting on her when she was a child. Cheater, God is not an ancient legend. The so-called spiritual energy revival and the so-called great changes in the world are just the world gradually removing the shackles and restoring its original appearance. On the earth countless years ago, there were gods. Cheater, don't blame your father for treating you like this. If you can integrate their genes, your awakened life will definitely be able to surpass everyone. Definitely. Bai Qi suddenly woke up from the unbearable memories. And Lin En also started the next step. He looked at the sky, and the purple light in his eyes was very bright. If the will of rules of vitality is integrated into this entire dark cloud, can it form a heavy rain containing vitality, a heavy rain that nourishes all things? Can this scene that only appears in fantasy novels really be reproduced in the real world? The next moment, Lin En raised his head and constructed an extremely huge wheel of life. He suddenly threw the wheel of life towards the dark clouds. Will it work? Lin En looked at the heavens and said. Under Lin En's gaze, the wheel of life continued to expand, and finally covered the dark clouds. The next moment, the time has come. Lin En looked at the sky and said. Let the rain fall. Crack! A flash of lightning streaked across the sky. The heavy rain poured down, and the whole Sanjiang town was covered by the heavy rain. The people on the square raised their heads tremblingly, looking at the downpour, and the next moment, they were shocked to see that when the rain fell on their bodies, it was instantly absorbed into their bodies. The wounds on their bodies healed at a speed visible to the naked eye under the nourishment of the heavy rain. The infected people who had already begun to lesion were even more shocked to see that their festering skin kept falling off, and was replaced by pink new skin. Everyone raised their heads and looked at Lin En tremblingly. I don't know who started to cry, and everyone cried. Saved. Really saved. I thought I would die after being infected. I thought there was no hope in life. But now, this rain has restored everything to its original state. Thank you. Thank you. We really don't know what to say to thank you now. We really. Lord Lin En. You will definitely be rewarded. You will definitely be rewarded. In the heavy rain, All the people knelt down in the direction of Lin En, kowtowed again and again. They may not be infected, but their families, their children, and their friends are infected with this damn plague. No one is not grateful to Lin En, because being helped in the most desperate time is the most sincere feeling. And Lin En still has no expression on his face, no joy, no excitement, calm as if he had done something insignificant. Because to him, this is indeed a trivial thing. Bai Qi looked at Lin En's profile for a long time, and she felt indescribable in her heart. Who is he? Is this kind of power and means like a miracle really something a human can do? Or maybe he is the descendant of the god that ruled the entire earth countless years ago, as his father said. Look! On the ground! Someone shouted. Bai Qi looked up at the square, and his heart was slightly shocked. In the ruins, small grasses slowly sprouted. Sprouting. It really is like a new life.